Hey everybody, welcome to another episode of Unleash Your Inner Diabetes Dominator. I'm very excited today to bring you a wonderful guest, Stacey Simms. She is an award-winning broadcaster and speaker. She produces and hosts Diabetes Connections, a popular new podcast which shares stories of connection to educate and inspire. Stacey has blogged since 2007 about her family's experience with type 1 diabetes, and she created and administers the Charlotte T1D Parent Facebook group. Stacey's son was diagnosed with type 1 diabetes in 2006, 1 month before he turned 2. She has served 2 terms on the board of directors of the Charlotte chapter of JDRF, where she donates all profits from her award-winning cookbook, I Can't Cook, but I Know Someone Who Can. Stacey and her son are part of the Animus Heroes program. For more than a decade, Stacey hosted Charlotte's morning news on WBT-AM, the city's top-rated morning news radio show, or morning radio news show. She has also worked at WBTV and Time Warner Cable News in Charlotte. Stacey's been named to the Charlotte Business Journal's 40 Under 40 and as one of the 50 most influential women in Mecklenburg County by the Mecklenburg Times. Hopefully I said that right, Stacey. Thank you for joining us today. How are you?
I'm great. Thank you for that wonderful intro. I feel like that was the red carpet welcome. Thank you.
Yeah, no, you have an impressive bio. Everybody should know that you're doing big things in the diabetes community, which is why I'd love to hear, how you got started. So usually you're probably maybe the 5th or 6th person out of 40 plus interviews that doesn't actually have diabetes themselves, but is heavily involved in our diabetes online and in-person community. So why don't you give us a little background onto, obviously I read about your son. Tell us how you decided to get started in being an advocate.
Sure. Well, Benny was diagnosed at 23 months, as you said. And at the time, I was working for WBT Radio, which is the news talk station here in Charlotte. So wherever you live, you've got that station probably on the AM dial that does news, weather, traffic, traffic and weather together every 10 minutes on the 10s. So that was what I was doing. But it was also a morning show where we talked about our lives. We had some fun. We would joke around. You got to know everybody. And we shared personal information like something like diabetes. So when Benny was diagnosed, my listeners wanted to know more. But at the same time, it wasn't the kind of thing that we were going to spend a lot of time on. That's the kind of show where you talk about the primaries and local politics. And it didn't make sense to do a lot on diabetes. So I started blogging and writing what was going on really just for me and my listeners, because this was 2006, Facebook, Twitter, there was none of that. And it wasn't with a thought to share nationally. It was more like, well, here's what's going on, and then please listen for other things. But I found that for myself, it was very helpful because I had I have an older daughter as well. So I had a 5-year-old and a 2-year-old. And we didn't know what we were doing at all. I mean, you become a parent and you're like, what do I do? They send you this kid home from the hospital and it's like, oh my God, I have a baby. Then with diabetes, they're like, here you go, 3 days in the hospital and good luck. And so blogging really, really helped me. And then later it helped me connect with people like you in the diabetes online community.
Awesome. So when your son got diagnosed, did he have what, many people would refer to as a typical diagnosis? He was drinking a lot and urinating a lot, or how did you know? And what was
we had a little bit of a weird diagnosis story. I have been a health reporter in television and radio for a very long time, since probably my second job in broadcasting. It wasn't my background, but it was more like, you're going to be the morning anchor in Syracuse. And by the way, that job comes with the health reporter gig. So you got to do that too. So I learned a lot pretty quickly and I loved it. I really got into it. And I know this much about a lot of different things. So we also were the radio station that sponsored the annual JDRF golf tournament here in town. So I got to know a few of the people from the board and some of the local families, and I interviewed 2 or 3 local families. So it was interesting that when my son was diagnosed, I was able to kind of go back and remember these were great kids and these were great families. And not only am I going to call them and get some information, but I remember that little kid who I asked him, what'd you eat for breakfast today? Because I didn't know what people with diabetes ate. And he was like, I had Pop-Tarts and applesauce or whatever. And his mother was like, mortified, like, no, we only eat steel cut oats. And, and I remember that kid had Pop-Tarts. So life goes on. By the way, we do not eat Pop-Tarts. We didn't before. and we don't after, not because I'm super, super healthy, but man, there's some things that you just cannot bolus for.
You're preaching to the choir on that.
Yeah, we know there's junk, but that's not one of it. But so when Benny was diagnosed, we noticed I was a morning show host. So I would go to work. I'd leave my house a little bit before, I don't know, 3:30 every morning. And my husband was home with the kids every morning. So he would just text me and say, we're off to school, or this funny thing happened, or they would send me pictures. And he texted me one morning. He said, Benny wet the bed like I've never seen before. Like the mattress, the floor, the key was still in a crib. I said, wow, that's weird. And then we went on, and it didn't happen again for another week. And then it happened again. And I knew just enough from being a medical reporter and talking to these kids. And I called my pediatrician, and she said, he's not even 2 years old. I've never seen it in a child that young, but bring him in and let's rule it out. So I brought him in. And, at the time, it's funny, we were the youngest people that pediatric practice had seen to that point, 23 months. Of course, I don't know if it's just something that's happening more, I don't know it, but we all know people with children who were diagnosed much younger than that, even, babies. So I brought him in, and his fasting glucose was 80. And so they were like, well, he doesn't have diabetes. Let's do a whole bunch of other tests. And it was the scariest couple of days because nobody knew what he had. And by Wednesday, they said, oh, he's got an infection of this kind. Here's some antibiotics. And we were so excited, like, woohoo, an infection, but it wasn't. And then Saturday, they called me and said, you got it to the hospital right now. We said, why? He's doing great. And they said, no, get to the hospital. And nobody told me. It was very weird. And I've gone back and talked to all of my healthcare providers since. Nobody knows when the ball was kind of dropped, but everybody thought somebody else told us. So it was about 8 o'clock at night when I turned to the hospitalist, who I'd never met, and said, can you tell me what, we all kind of knew, but no one had said, can you tell me what my son has? She said, he's got type 1 diabetes. And I was like, well, someone really should tell us that and come talk to us. It was very weird. But we were actually at that point almost relieved because it had been a week of mystery and not knowing what was going on. So from there, I think it's a fairly typical story of as typical as you get with a not yet 2-year-old of how you deal with diabetes.
Yeah, well, that is interesting. So if his fasting glucose was 80, like you said, someone dropped the ball, like was that a false reading, or he just what?
No, I think what happened, what the endocrinologist told us later was that his A1C was 11.5.
Oh, okay.
So he was there, but the issue was more that he was honeymooning so much that the pancreas was still working enough that occasionally, he was okay. And that was one of those instances that he was okay. But thankfully, they did take us seriously. I still don't know if it took 4 days to get the blood tests back or what, but we see the same pediatrician. We're still in the same system. I don't feel like it was negligent. It was just a little strange.
Right. Yeah. And I guess, for doctors, I've had many, many experiences with many doctors over my life. And, I've had doctors say similar things, not diabetes related. It's funny, I had a blood draw one time where it was unfortunately a very elderly person that was drawing the blood, and they hit a nerve. There was and I have blood drawn every 3 months. So it's not out of the realm of my understanding, and that it doesn't hurt. And you don't feel like you lose the loss of ability to move your hand after it happens.
Right. The difference.
I went back to the doctor's office and I said, the person that drew my blood hit a nerve. I have to go see, I guess a neurologist or whatever, because I had to go get treatment for it. And the guy said, well, I've never heard of that happening, the doctor said, so that can't be possible. And I was like, what kind of attitude does that to have just because you've never heard of it? And obviously your doctor's office was much more, like you said, professional, and they entered.
Oh, I'm so thankful, because you hear too many times where they say, oh, it couldn't be.
Right.
It's not
that's what his attitude was. Well, it couldn't have happened. I said, I can barely move my hand from that. So,
are you okay? Did you have any?
This was years ago. And I'm totally 100% fine now. And it was just, temporary damage or what have you. But that's that attitude that reminds me, some doctors have that. Well, if I've never heard of it, it's not possible that it could be what's going on. But yeah, so I'm glad that your doctor had a great attitude and everything. You're still seeing the same doctor. So obviously that was 2006. So your son is now how old?
He just turned 11. His birthday is at the end of December. So he was diagnosed at the beginning of December and always has his birthday at the end of December. So he just turned 11, which is crazy. So this December is 10 years.
Awesome. So
Can't even believe, yeah.
he's doing well. Obviously, you're heavily involved. So a lot of parents out there, I know I actually get emails from parents asking me questions all the time because I work, with my mom. If I go out and I've given many speeches. I've spoken at the Children's Hospital of Philadelphia, and I bring my mom with me because I was speaking at a support group for parents of newly diagnosed children.
Oh, wow. Yeah.
So, I'm sure you realize in that moment of being diagnosed, and we also got very inadequate information in the hospital. This was 1991 for me, but we got like a pamphlet and like, here's how you count carbs and go. And
right.
Like, there was no internet. And like, so it was so even now that there is the internet, parents find, and I find that it's much more difficult for the parents to handle the diagnosis than it is for the child, because the parents essentially have to become the caretaker. The parents have to become the pancreas. So I bring my mom with me to speak to people because she says to them, look, I didn't have any of the stuff that you have. And look, it's going to be okay.
Right.
Yes, there's going to be ups and downs. Yes, there's going to be. So, does your son, is he involved with your, advocacy efforts? Is he like, Mom, what are you doing? Are you crazy? Like, what's his attitude?
He has been, I think, fairly typical of a kid, of a crazy parent like me, in that in the beginning, yes, super involved, came to every event, really rah-rah, speaking out. And now I think very appropriately, he is less inclined. And we have discussions all the time about what are we going to do at this event? Because as you mentioned, I am the admin of a very large, this is crazy. I started a Facebook group here in Charlotte for parents because we could not find each other.
Right.
There are great charity groups that do wonderful things, but connecting parents in this area, at least, was not something that they did. And I found myself as a public person fielding a lot of phone calls and messages. Can you help me find a babysitter? Do you know of this? Or how can we find that? I just want to get together and have coffee. And a couple of years ago, I started this Facebook group that connects people solely by geography. And that's, here locally. So we do events. We just did an event about camp. Like, hey, you want to find out more about diabetes camp? We're going to go bowling. I've invited the camp directors. They're going to come hang out. I also, I'm like, hey, by the way, Animus and Dexcom will pay for it. So we invite them. You work what you got to work. So everybody shows up. Yeah, right? So everybody's happy. But I had to talk to my son ahead of time and say, what do you want to do at this event? Are you bowling and playing laser tag? Are you talking to kids about camp and your experience? Are you willing to talk to parents? Are you taking pictures, or are you going to stay home because you don't want to do any of it? And that's right. We have to give him that choice, because he didn't ask, not only did he not ask for diabetes, he didn't ask to be an advocate. He didn't ask to speak, and he may not want to. My daughter, who is now 14, has asked me to not put her on social media anyplace. She's not on social media herself, which I know is so weird for a high school freshman. But I really respect that. I've lost my first day of school pictures of my kids, because now my son, of course, is like, well, I don't want to be there either. But I really think you have to respect that. And because I signed up to do all this public speaking and advocacy work, it doesn't mean he did. He might want to, but that's his choice. So that's my long answer to your question.
Yeah, no, I think that's a fantastic attitude to have. And I think especially, and I don't have children, but, I would like to say I had an amazing upbringing. And even though I lost my father young, my parents loved each other very much, and, respected me, and, treated me like an adult, but not in a not loving or caring way, but they gave me the option, but I think that a lot of parents of children with diabetes, and I've worked with a lot of parents with children with diabetes, a lot of my clients end up being parents and their teenage children. Transitionary phase for them. But I find that it's hard for parents to get to loosen up the kind of that need to have all of the control. And I think that that's, indicative of how you're probably allowing him to manage his diabetes decision. No, not true.
I have it all figured out. I am so no. I'm just laugh because it's such a struggle. You mentioned that the parents have it harder than the kids because the parents have to be the kid's pancreas. And I think that's half of the picture. But I think, too, as a parent, you kind of have, this is going to be a terrible analogy. I haven't thought this through, but it occurred to me when you said pancreas. Your child is also your heart. So there's that wonderful saying that, when you have a child, it's like somebody's taking your heart and put it on legs and it's walking out. And that's also what you go through as a parent of a child with diabetes. There's this balance of, it is my job to keep you safe and happy. And, you know, I would like to wrap you in bubble wrap and dose you and check you appropriately, but you can't leave the house, you can't move, you know, no. And then there's this also this thought of, well, I've got to bring you up so you leave, right? You've got to be independent. And I'm bringing you up so you will leave me. And that's a very difficult balance, especially for parents of a kid with a chronic condition, because we want to keep you safe in the moment, which means we want to limit certain things, but if you limit those things, then it doesn't keep you good and safe over here. So I struggle with that all of the time. But I think that in a way, the social media and everything that's on the internet too has spread a lot of fear among parents, and that's not a great thing. So that, I mean, it's a double-edged sword. There's great information and support out there too.
Yeah, absolutely. And so you said you're Animas Heroes program. So does your son on an Animas pump? Is that what he does? And does he, you know, does he kind of bolus himself, or are you still heavily involved in that, or what at 11? Because I don't really know. Because when I was 11, I was on manual daily injections, and you know, I don't even remember. I'm sure my mom was helping me. I was on, you know, NPH and R, like, you know, mixing them together in a syringe. So I mean, this is like totally different. You know, 20 years ago, but it's still a totally different world. So like, what is an 11-year-old, you know, in your home? Like, what level of involvement is he having in his own?
Well, I'll give you the extremes. You know, let's remember he went on a pump when he was 2.5, and we've always used the Animas product. He started with a 2020, which I don't know, you know, it was a long time ago. And then he was on the Ping, which has the remote. And now we're trying to decide if we're going to go to Vibe, where you lose the remote, but get the CGM, you know, I can't remember the integration. So I will say that we are at the two extremes. My husband especially will tell you that I baby my son way too much, and I will still check and bolus him when he's home, because, you know, when he was 2, we did everything. And he was probably checking and bolusing himself with supervision by the time he was 3 or 4. Certainly by the time he went to kindergarten, he could do everything with supervision. So he is responsible for himself completely when he's out of the house. When I'm in the house with him, you know, it's like, oh, Mom, will you check me? Will you bolus me? I'm lazy. And he'll say, I'm lazy. Will you check me? You know, will you bolus me? And I think that's hysterical, because in a year or 2, he's not going to want me anywhere near him. Probably. Right? I mean, ew, Mom. Right. Right? So I think that's going to end itself. But he does everything to the point where he goes away to a sleepaway camp that is not diabetes camp. Oh. And so he is responsible for doing everything. There's a great medical staff there. They do keep an eye on him. He's very well minded, but they are not a diabetes staff, and they don't do any diabetes stuff for him. So site changes, cartridge refills, making sure his sites are rotated, counting carbs. He learned a lot of that at diabetes camp, but he goes as well to a regular camp. So that's the level of independence and he started that camp. This will be his 4th year. He was 8 when he went the first time to that camp.
So he's self-sufficient, doing all of that stuff at 8. I mean, I just started using a pump like about 4 years ago out of 21 years. So, I mean, yeah, that's pretty.
Well, you know, and it's hard. And I have gotten some criticism because I'm very open about doing that. He went the first time for 2 weeks, and he asked to do it, and he pushed to do it knowing what it entailed. Do I think he's ready to do it around the clock or around the year? No way. But for those 2 weeks, and now for those almost months that he goes away to this camp, he is ready and willing to do it. But I wouldn't let him do it. I think 11 is too young to be completely self-sufficient, certainly. He's got to have somebody looking over his shoulder, at least making sure everything is going well. But he's responsible.
Yeah, and in my opinion, you know, just someone with diabetes and who grew up having the ability to have freedoms and be independent, just like you're giving your son, I think you're doing him a huge favor. And this is, again, just my opinion, but you know, my parents raised me to be independent. I had the option to move out of the house at 18, not because I had to. My mom was moving about an hour away from where we lived for a new job that she had gotten, which she's still at, which is now almost 16 years later. But she said and she owned the duplex that we lived in. She said, either you can stay here, find a roommate, and I'll be your landlord, or you can move with me. And and my mom's my best friend to this day, but I said, I'm staying and I'm getting a roommate. And it's kind of like you said, she was, although I want to see her constantly, and honestly, if I could like have like a mom house, like I would love to have her right next to me. At the same time, you're raising your child to, although you want them close and safe, you want them to be able to go out into the world and take care of themselves and have a good head on their shoulders. And I think personally what you're doing with your son is going to allow him to have that in spades. And I think
Thank
that's
you.
really
I'll call you every day. If I do work. I mean, I can't lie. It's not easy on you.
Sure. I'm sure it's not. But yeah. So I was going to say, I actually didn't know until today that you had a cookbook. So tell me a little bit, because I love the title. That's probably the best. I can't cook, but I know someone who can. So tell me how that came to be.
Well, this is several years ago now, and I was really in my gung-ho JDRF fundraising time. You know, I was on the board, and we're going to do something to raise a lot of money. And I was very much in the public eye in Charlotte with the radio show, but we did a lot with restaurants at the time. My husband owned a restaurant, and we had a lot of advertising. We did the Charlotte Restaurant Week had just started. It's a real up and coming kind of restaurant scene. You know, we have Charleston, we have Atlanta, and then it's like we're a bank town. But you know, we're really up and coming that way. So the idea kind of came to me. Wouldn't it be fun to do a cookbook using all the different recipes submitted by restaurants locally? And then, you know, I would write funny stories because I really cannot cook. My husband, as I said, owned a restaurant, but he's also a great cook. He's not a trained chef, but he's a really good cook and a great home cook. And so when we met 21 years ago, I had like a Diet Coke and an onion in my fridge. You know, I was like, oh. And so he made me dinner, and that was the end of that. And I loved it. And, you know, I never really learned to cook because I never really had to. So that was why. I mean, those stories in the cookbook, and I tell stories of my kitchen disasters in between the wonderful recipes that were submitted by mostly chefs here in Charlotte, a few national recipes, and a couple of friends and family recipes. But I mean, just the other day, my kids asked me, can you make those muffin puddings? What is a muffin pudding? Like, yeah, remember you made those muffins, and then they were, the oven was broken, and I didn't notice. So I made these really cool pumpkin, like chocolate pumpkin muffins. They're really good and really easy. But you have to have an oven that works, because otherwise, if one of the, what are they called? Thingies, it's like components is out. So the oven was supposed to be at 400 and it was only at 200. And so you got this awesome, it was like a lava cake. You had like a muffin on the outside and pudding on the inside. So I was able to recreate that. So
by your accidental situation, you created something that your children create.
I'm such a great mom.
That's amazing. I mean, let's bring this back around. So over your years of living with having a child with diabetes, what would you say are Stacey's top 3 tips for thriving with diabetes, whether they're for parents or children or both, or just general? What would you say?
In no particular order, I would say put your oxygen mask on yourself first. Do not let your child's condition or anything with any of your children become your entire life. I said something, I had a throwaway comment on my podcast last week. I was talking about camp, and I said, camp is great because if you're a child, it kind of helps you, like, who am I when I'm not with my parents, right? Who do I want to be, and who am I becoming when I'm not with them? And as a parent, it's a great question. Who am I when I'm not with my kids? And I heard from several people, I've never thought about that. Who am I when I'm not with my kids? Put your oxygen mask on first. Take care of yourself, or you will not be able to take care of those kids. Whether that means getting a full 8 hours of sleep once in a while, asking for help, pushing your husband to do more, telling your parents to help, training a kid to babysit, I don't know, but getting your hair cut and looking beautiful, do something for yourself, and it'll make you a better caregiver. Your child, the number 2, again, not in any order, and I didn't make this one up, but your child is not a number. Your child is a child. So we all get really hung up on A1Cs. I was given great advice several years ago by author and speaker Maura McCarthy, who wrote a wonderful book on raising teens with diabetes, to stop sharing my child's A1C online. And I never even thought about that, because I would put on Twitter, hey, yay, 7.2, what a great day. Or, you know, oh my gosh, we clicked up into the 8s for the very first time. What is happening? You know, she said, stop. You're not helping anyone. You're making the people with higher A1Cs feel bad. You're making the people with lower A1Cs feel smug. And it's not your information, it's your child's information. Think about why you're putting it out there and what you hope to accomplish. And I thought, wow, what cool advice, because why am I doing this? You can accomplish the same thing by saying, tough day at the endo, but man, he was really encouraging and changed a lot of values, and we're really going to go from here. I don't want my child to be 18 and click on the internet and see a list of his A1Cs. Because you know what? If he can see it, so can his employer and his potential girlfriend and anybody else. And I just think, gosh, would I want my mother? My daughter gained 3 pounds today. Tickety tick tick tick, right? Her cholesterol seems to be an issue. I mean, when you think about it that way, it's not my information, it's his. So your kid is not a number, which means more than the A1C, but I like that too. Not everything has to be about diabetes. I have to give you 3 pieces of advice that I didn't think out ahead of time. Ooh.
I like to get people, just off the top of your head. It could be anything. And I think so far you've had 2 that maybe I've never even had before. A lot of times they're very similar, which is not a bad thing. It just shows that, we all have common threads. But no, these are great. I mean, Maura McCarthy is a great, advocate for everything. But I'm a huge fan of knowing your outcome. That's my husband and I, we're very big into personal development. We do a lot of seminars and events because we want to, be the best versions of ourselves that we can and help as many people as possible. And when my pump is beeping. Know your outcome is really one, because like you said, why am I putting this online? Why are you doing it? That could go along to anything. Why are you doing anything? Whatever it is, why are you, saying anything to anyone before having a conversation with somebody that might be an employer or a friend or someone you have a relationship with? What is the outcome that you're trying to achieve? And I think that if put into that context with the A1Cs, I think that's, this is his information, and why are you doing it? I love it. I
can't take credit for it, but I can take credit for it. There's something else that I do tell people. So I got my number 3. I thought about it. Okay. So I always say, if something is not working for you, don't assume it's you. Because we had so many issues for the first 2 or 3 years with a pump with the insets not sticking. And I was convinced that that was the only option, and that was the way it was, and these things were just going to fall off. And all it took was a little bit of skin tack. But when you think about, which is a product, if you're not familiar, I know you are, Danielle, but if as you listen, it's just something you put on the skin. It's a skin barrier, but it makes it stickier. And it helps insects stick 100% better. And there's a couple of different brands out there. Everybody's skin is different. You got to find what works for you. But again, this was pre-Facebook. So I wasn't going into my group and saying, oh, my skin, is falling off. How do I do? There was none of that. And it took several years for me to just think, even to ask my educator, what do we do? And she was like, what? And she sent me a ton of samples in the mail. And we actually wound up, we were using the Clio insets, which were discontinued for a while. We switched over to the Animus insets with the Skin Tech, 100% better. And I said at that time, if it doesn't work, it's not us. We have to keep searching. It might be you, I guess, but don't assume right out of the box that it's you. And I had to say that to myself recently. We were dealing with something and I was like, why am I not taking my own advice? There are different products. I mean, we're limited, but there's a lot you can at least try before giving up.
I totally agree. I have the same. I use Skin Tack particularly for my Dexcom. I don't have any problem with I use an Omnipod, but that's to me, that's the stickiest thing ever. I mean, you can only keep it on for 3 days. So even 3 days in, it's just it's clinging there. But with the Dexcom, like this one, I've probably had on now I'm moving up to my 3rd week at this point. I put a little Skin Tack on, slap it on, and then about a week and a half in, it starts coming up, and I just slap some off-site FlexiFix tape on top of it, and that thing's hanging in there, giving me good readings. So
we can't put anything on top of anything on my son's skin. We can't put any tape. We can't put that funky, cool grip thing. Nothing. Anything we put on top peels right off. But if we leave it alone, it'll stay on for 2 weeks.
Hey, and that's like you said, everybody is different. I like it. You got to find what works for you. Awesome. So you've shared so much wonderful information. And so before we wrap it up, I always want to say, is there anything else that you'd like to mention or bring, light to or say before we kind of wrap it up here?
Well, I guess just that one of the best pieces of advice I got, and to bring it full circle again to his diagnosis, was I was so lucky that my listeners of the radio show, I had several adults, people like yourself with type 1 who wrote in to say, it's going to be okay. It was harder on my mom than it was on me. But I heard from, I'll never forget this, it was a firefighter, a bank executive, and a cop. And they all said, don't baby him. Push him. Don't let it hold him back, because you set the tone. And if you tell him he can't do something, he's going to believe it. And if you tell him he can, he's going to believe it. So I was always so grateful to those listeners for doing that. And, that's really, that made a huge difference for us. And now with my podcast I started last summer, which I like better than blogging. I wasn't the best blogger because I'm not super strident in my, yelling at people and my beliefs, and this is the right way to do it. I feel like the podcast is a much better medium for me. I really enjoy talking to people. And I'll have to have you on as a guest soon. So that'll be a lot of fun.
Awesome. So, I love this. This was great. You, like I said, you gave amazing information. And honestly, I didn't even realize it, but this whole time my blood sugar's been 65. So if I seem drunk this whole time, I feel like I didn't even realize it until that started beeping. But,
all right. So, Mom says go get a drink.
I'm going to go have some glucose tabs. And so, yeah, thank you for joining us. And I'll hopefully be on your show soon. And we will keep the advocacy going. So thank you, Stacey, for joining us. As usual, I will link to all of Stacey's links underneath the video, beneath the YouTube video, and beneath the blog. So you can get in touch with her, find her Charlotte chapter, T1D parents, and everything. Just scroll down. All right, guys, thank you so much for joining us, and we will catch you on the next episode of Unleash Your Inner Diabetes Dominator.